fired. Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I couldn't tell if you heard me or not. Okay.
Yes. So the prosecutors, they wined and dined her and didn't seem to work, right?
No, I think they, I don't know whether they intimidated her or what they did, but they just seemed to think that she was going to be, the best witness they ever put on the stand in a courtroom, and she turned out to be a disaster for them. And she testified that Michael was a wonderful father, that the people around him repeatedly took advantage of him, that he didn't know what these people were doing, and she testified in a totally consistent way with what we were saying. She demolished their conspiracy theory that Michael somehow was leading a conspiracy of criminals to falsely imprison a family and abduct children and commit extortion. She was a great witness for Michael Jackson in that trial, and I've never forgotten it.
No question. For this next segment of the Jerry Sandusky, I want to introduce a special guest. I think you told me you heard of him before. He's from FramingPaterno.com. He's been following the Sandusky case and the Joe Paterno case, and I know recently you, Tom, have wrote an article or something about Jerry Sandusky. So let's say hello to Mr. John Ziegler. Good evening, John. How are you?
I'm doing well, and Tom, always good to speak to you, and I enjoyed the discussion on the Jackson case. I certainly wish that you had been representing Jerry Sandusky, because I think he'd be playing golf today if you had been.
Well, John, it's good to talk to you, and just so everyone knows, John contacted me and wanted to talk to me about the Sandusky trial, which I didn't really know a lot about. I followed it at a distance. The press coverage, of course, was terrible for the defense. It seemed to me they had rushed this case to trial, but I don't really know what happened between Mr. Sandusky and these young men, and I was never in the courtroom, but I talked to John, and I did a little research myself, and I came to the conclusion that, as John believes, that there were some major problems with the way this case was conducted. I don't know if he's innocent or guilty. I really don't know. But when John pointed out to me just the financial motives that some of these, or perhaps all of these alleged victims may have had, I kept drawing parallels to the Michael Jackson case. For example, John pointed out to me that these alleged victims, for the most part, went to one attorney to represent them in their financial claims against Penn State. Well, it just reminded me of the Arvizos going to attorney Larry Feldman, who had represented Jordy Chandler in the early 90s. And they spoke with him before they went to the police, as I recall. And then John pointed out to me the lack of third-party witnesses allegedly watching what happened, because apparently most of the trial, if not all of it, was young men who had financial motives claiming they were molested with nobody corroborating any of this. And I looked at some other factors, and again, I kept getting flashbacks to the Michael Jackson case, the way the media tried to cook Michael, the financial motives that were everywhere, the way witnesses came out of the woodwork who, in my opinion, wanted fame or fortune or both. And I just saw too many, upsetting parallels, and talked to John quite a bit and decided to do the article. But again, I'm not an authority on the Sandusky case. I wasn't in the courtroom, and I don't really know what happened with Mr. Sandusky and these young men. However, there are enough problems in that case to certainly get people thinking, was this really a fair trial? It seems to me it may not have been.
And, Tom, I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at it yet, but this week the Sandusky defense team released, or was unsealed, their post-conviction relief petition, which I think does an extraordinary job of exposing exactly what you just said, which is that the trial was not fair. It was a violation of his constitutional rights. It was a modern version of the Salem witch trial. You did a great job in your op-ed, which people can see at framingpaterno.com. But what you probably aren't even aware of, because it was just in the petition this week, is this is a classic example of just incredible prosecutorial misconduct and defense incompetence. One of the major counts that Sandusky was convicted on was the so-called janitor episode. The janitor never testified at trial because we were told he had dementia. Well, we learned this week that before the prosecution determined that he had dementia, they interviewed him on video, and the transcript of that interview has now been released, and 3 times the janitor says when asked, was that Jerry Sandusky that you saw? He says, no, 3 times. And it is my view that the prosecution simply decided at that point, thank you very much, Mr. James Calhoun, that's his name. You have dementia, clearly, because you gave us the wrong answer. We will not be needing you to testify at trial, and we're going to rely on hearsay evidence, which should never even come in, hearsay testimony, under a bizarre exception to the hearsay rule. And Jerry ended up getting convicted on 5 counts in that episode without a victim, without a witness, without a contemporaneous report, and without a date. And that is emblematic of the entire case. And I went into this believing that Joe Paterno, as you believe, Tom, was railroaded by the news media. I never dreamed that Jerry Sandusky was, but now I am completely convinced that he was. And this is, I know you don't have the experience enough to be able to say it, and I admire you for what you've done here, Tom, and I totally respect your position. But having lived it for 3 years, I'm positive that Jerry is innocent. It's the only scenario that makes any sense and is consistent with all the known evidence in the case.
Well, it's funny because Jordan told me before this interview that he was going to ask me about Jim Clemente. And
right.
Jordan actually emailed me a few clips of Mr. Clemente's comments about me, and one of them was, he said I was wrong when I said that there were no third-party witnesses, and he references the janitor.
Matter of fact, I have that clip. Let me play that clip for you guys, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss what Ms. Clemente said.
All right, the last thing I want to talk about rather quickly, because we're sort of running out of time, is the issue. Actually, we had Tom Mesereau on the show while Jim was off filming episodes of Criminal Minds. And Tom Mesereau was talking about Mr. Sandusky and raising some issues about that case. And I was kind of sorry that Jim wasn't here to chat with him. But basically, the issue was that that there were some problems in the prosecution of Mr. Sandusky because the one eyewitness to the sexual abuse, McCreary, the assistant coach, was found not to be credible by even the jury and had changed the story a multitude of times. And my question to Mr. Mesereau was, is it necessary to have an independent witness if there are people claiming that they were sexually abused? I mean, I know it's not as easy to prosecute when there is one person saying I didn't do it and somebody else saying that you did. But what has been your experience in that case? Do you think that there were some issues that with the prosecution that make you less convinced of Sandusky's guilt?
Absolutely not. Mr. Mesereau, Mr. Mesereau is wrong when he says that McQuarrie was not believed by the jury. They only didn't convict of the anal rape of that child. They did convict based solely on McQuarrie's testimony for sexual molestation of the child and corruption of a minor. So there were 2 charges that were based solely on McQuarrie's testimony. They did find him credible. So, sorry, Tom, that's not accurate. But the fact is...
He did change his story a number of times.
He did, yeah. There's no question. And the way he changed his story, there are issues with McQuarrie. And, we can talk about them another time if you want. But the fact is that he was one eyewitness. Actually, there were 2 other eyewitnesses. One was a janitor who passed away, but he had told the story to a second janitor, and that person testified. And then there was the coach at the grade school, where one of the victims was laying on the floor with Sandusky late at night in a back room of the gym, and the coach saw him, and Sandusky got up on one elbow and said, "Oh, we're just working on some wrestling moves," and the coach thought, "Well, I'm the wrestling coach, and I don't know any wrestling moves like that," but he said, "What am I talking about? This is Jerry Sandusky, he's a saint." That child later came forward, and that eyewitness testimony corroborated what that child said, so that he was then molested later that evening. So there are more than one eyewitness, and the jury did find that witness credible, so that's not really safe to say. So I don't, for those reasons...
he was raising issues and questions
I get it.
About it. And he was not saying that he thought, just to be clear with you guys, he wasn't saying that he thought he was innocent. He said there were some problems for him.
And I get it. And actually I watched the show, and it was very good, and he was actually balanced, and he did say that he hasn't analyzed this particular case, he's not an expert on it, and so forth. But I will say that, that there are...
But you are. That's why I wanted...
I did analyze the case, and I would love to talk to Tom about it and explain...
He will be back.
I bet, and so will I. So I would love to explain the details of it and debate with him or whatever. But he also said this. He said, the Michael Jackson trial was littered with testimony of people who had financial incentive to exaggerate, embellish, or worse. It was an embarrassment. Well, I do think, I agree with Tom Mesereau on one point, that Michael Jackson and Jerry Sandusky are very much the same kind of person. I believe that they are both nice guy, pillar of the community, acquaintance offenders, who everybody who knew them loved them. That's what they were. And they used that position to do things. I believe Mr. Sandusky was actually much more of an offender than Michael Jackson was. I think the fact that Michael Jackson, what Sandusky is accused of doing and convicted of doing was much more heinous than what Michael Jackson was accused of doing, but not convicted of doing. But I think that when you look at, he's denigrating the witnesses or or the victims that then sued civilly when Michael Jackson's family sued AEG for billions of dollars, not millions, billions of dollars because of what happened to Michael. It is a legitimate process, and it is not something that undermines the credibility of the people.
Well, I don't know. I do think that most prosecutors would probably argue that you don't want your witnesses who are going to be in a criminal prosecution to be engaging in civil lawsuits because it looks as if they have another...
But it happened the same thing.
It looks as if they might have another... But people are concerned about it. It's the same thing as taking money to appear on some television show to talk about what happened. They want it to be a pure process where they go after them. Because otherwise,
it is, and it was an absolutely separate process. They didn't sue till after the
But there
criminal process
was in both of
over.
those cases a deep pocket, and it does make people wonder when somebody is trying to, is going after someone civilly.
I'm not saying that it shouldn't make people wonder, but it does not undermine the credibility of it. It does not make it. I mean, was the Jackson family exaggerating, embellishing, and embarrassing because they went and sued AEG, or did they want to get retribution for the fact that this company pushed Michael to the point where he's dead now?
Well, furthermore, there was no criminal charges filed against AEG.
Well, the doctor, he was convicted.
I know,
and
that was a civil lawsuit.
Right.
Yes, I know, but
it was based on the criminal conviction of the doctor. So the doctor was convicted, then they filed a civil suit.
Okay, first I want to go to Tom Mesereau on this, and then John Ziegler in response to what Mr. Jim Clemente said. So, Tom,
first,
you take the floor
I think
first.
you got to see a psychiatrist. I think he needs help. I mean, first of all, he says that he agrees with me that Michael and Sandusky were alike. I never said they were alike. In fact, I can't think of two people more different than Michael Jackson, a creative genius, and Sandusky, a career football coach. I mean, I don't know what Clemente was smoking before that interview, but it's not legal. Let's put it that way. No, I think, and then to compare alleged victims of molestation who go to lawyers to get money before they go to the police with the AEG case. I mean, this guy is from outer space. I don't know. I don't know. He's got some problems that really need to be addressed. I actually thought he was a lot more intelligent than I do now after hearing this thing. As far as the witnesses in the case, I'll defer to John Ziegler on that one. He's more of an authority than I am.
Well, Tom, let me back up what you just said about Jim Clemente. I had a very similar experience with Jim. I went into I've had hours and hours of conversation with Jim Clemente, and I presumed at the first, naively, that he was an expert. I mean, because he's got good credentials and the media treats him as if he's an expert. And I slowly realized he didn't have a clue about both the facts of the case as well as just basic reality of human behavior. He does not understand human behavior. He's been wrong about almost every case I've ever seen him comment on, including the Jackson case. And as far as the facts of alleged facts of what he references there, it's hilarious. First of all, we'll go in reverse order. He counts someone witnessing wrestling as somehow a third-party witness to sexual abuse, which is preposterous and I think on its face absurd. The janitors I've already proven were a joke, and the direct witness there never testified and said on the record in an interview that the prosecution did, which was just made public this week, that Jerry Sandusky was not the person he saw. So that's number two down. The third one is Mike McQueary. And see, Jim's in a real tough spot here, Tom, because Jim's been paid a lot of money by the Paterno family to have a very, very nuanced view of Mike McQueary. See, Mike McQueary has to be telling part of the truth, but he can't be telling the whole truth, but he also can't be totally lying because Scott Paterno has paid him a lot of money to have a particular view. I believe that Jim Clemente will say whatever it is that for whatever is in his self-interest, whether that's money or whether that's fame or whether it's both. But Mike McQueary, you are right, was not believed by the jury because on the primary, most important, most salacious charge, Jerry Sandusky, despite a hanging jury and all the media coverage in the world supporting a false narrative, was found not guilty on that particular charge involving Mike McQueary. And I frankly believe the jury should have found him not guilty on all of them because we have the Whitney, the actual victim, quote-unquote victim, the kid who was in the shower as a 24-year-old sergeant in the Marine Corps, married. He gave a statement to Joe Amendola, Jerry Sandusky's attorney, making it very, very clear that he was the boy in the shower that night. Nothing ever happened. Jerry was the greatest thing that ever happened to him. And it was the second time he had said that because he had been interviewed by police just 2 months prior. And 4 months prior, he had written a series of articles in the newspaper, letters to the editor, defending Jerry Sandusky. This was a kid who got absorbed by the primary lawyer in the case after Joe Paterno gets fired, after Fort Knox gets opened by Penn State. Everybody knows there's money, and that lawyer flipped this particular victim, a kid by the name of Alan Myers, who was the boy in the McQueary episode. He was not molested, and Mike McQueary is mistaken and was manipulated by prosecutors to provide the smoking gun of a crime that never happened. And Jim Clemente is clueless. I've experienced him firsthand. He has lied to me under very stressful situations. He has manipulated me, and I believe him to be a whore. And so Tom thinks he's smoking something that's illegal, and I believe him to be a bad person who's not very bright and is not nearly the expert he's portrayed to be.
Well, when I said smoke something illegal, I was joking. I mean,
understood, Tom.
I'm just using that comment to illustrate how absurd this guy is. I mean, to say I said they were alike, boy, I would never said anything like that. And if you look at Michael Jackson, an absolute genius in choreography and music and dance and song, running around the world doing humanitarian things. And you look at Jerry Sandusky, who's a big, muscular football coach, and that's all I know he ever did. Who would ever say these two are alike, other than Jim Clemente? It's just, I mean, I have more respect for, even though I don't agree with him. You know, he is a lawyer. He was an FBI agent. He has been an expert of sorts, as I understand it, in various trials, I think, around the country. He was an FBI expert, I believe, pedophilia, and he was the one that the prosecutors were consulting with during the investigation into Michael Jackson. I mean, after what I heard in that quote, I'm glad the prosecutors did consult with him. It may have helped them lose.
Well, Tom, I spoke to Jim about the Jackson case. He claims, and I don't know if this is true or not because I don't trust Jim. He claims to have been there when Michael Jackson was physically examined for identifying marks. And I think what's really interesting about Jim Clemente, Tom, and I'd like to hear your take, is that because he's an abuse victim, he claims to be an abuse victim himself, I think that this creates an extraordinary bias on his part when it comes to cases like this. I don't think he can possibly imagine, and I'm giving him credit for being sincere, I don't think he can possibly imagine the notion that anybody would ever tell a false story of sex abuse. Because he was an abuse victim himself. And I think this sets up an incredibly devastating precedent and rule, if you will, for investigators, because now we're in a world where if you say you were abused, you have to be believed, and if you deny you're abused, that's actually a sign you were abused based upon people like Jim Clemente. So how do you possibly defend yourself against an accusation like that? What is your take on that, Tom?
Well, I mean, I met Jim one time when I interviewed on a show, and I talked to him before the show, and I talked to him during the show, and he seemed very professional. He seemed to be a very intelligent, articulate, restrained guy who at least purported to me to accept other viewpoints and treat them in a respectful way. But the quote I just heard from Jordan gives me a very different impression of this fellow. I don't know. Something's off base for sure. Now, someone who's a victim of child abuse, may have a very difficult time being objective when someone else raises a similar allegation. But there have been many false allegations of child abuse through the years, and I remember in the Michael Jackson trial cross-examining one of the experts for the prosecution on false claims made in child custody cases, where parents who are just filled with anger and venom towards the other side will get their kids to say they were molested when it didn't happen. I mean, this is an area, it's a very troubling, very serious area of the law which is very, very ripe, in my opinion, with exaggerated claims and with false claims, and also with true claims. Don't get me wrong. I mean, child abuse is a horrific part of life. It's absolutely monstrous what some people do to helpless children, and
of course.
But I've seen enough false claims made, and as a defense attorney, to know that you have to be very, very careful when you listen to a child to determine if they're really being truthful and objective, or if someone has put ideas in their mind for whatever purpose, like I just described in many of these child custody cases, divorce cases. Early in my career, I don't do divorce work, but earlier in my career, you didn't hear very often, divorcing parents claim the other parent was a child molester. Now it seems like it's a norm, and people just get very vindictive and very hostile, and they manipulate situations. So you've got to be very careful in deciding who has influenced a child when they make these allegations. The allegations they make may be perfectly true. They may be the victims of absolute monstrous behavior. They also may be put up to it by manipulative parents who have fed information into their imagination, and suddenly the child believes it's true because their parents have told them it is. It's a very, very difficult, sensitive, tricky area of the law, and you have to be alert to the possibility that people are going to manipulate it. I mean, look at the Wade Robson, Jimmy Safechuck case. I mean, these are two young men. I mean, as I've said many times, when I decided to put on a defense case, I knew it was fraught with risks, because anytime you put on a witness in a trial, it's fraught with risks, because they're subject to cross-examination. You don't know what the other side will come out with. In the Michael Jackson trial, Ron Zonin was one of the finest, prosecutors I've ever seen, passionate, determined, aggressive, very smart, very prepared. And I remember when he just went after Wade Robson viciously for supporting Michael Jackson. But the point I wanted to make was I wanted to start our case strong, and I wanted to end strong. And I did just that. I started with Wade Robson, who was absolutely adamant under oath that Michael Jackson had never done anything improper towards him. He even called it ridiculous. And this was a young man who was intelligent, who was articulate, who seemed very mature. I called his mother and his sister also as witnesses because they supported Michael Jackson, and they had been traveling with them, and they had no problem with anything they saw Michael do. I ended with Chris Tucker, who was just a tremendous witness for the defense. And in between, we had witnesses. I mean, there was one woman I'll never forget. She left some messages, tearful messages on my machine, and I called her back, and she said she had been a paralegal at a law firm that had represented Janet Arvizo when Janet Arvizo and her children were suing JCPenney stores for assault. And she claimed that Janet Arvizo had told her that she made the story up of sexual abuse and threatened her that if she ever told anybody, she could be very difficult to deal with. I think this woman even said something, claimed there was some threat about the Mexican mafia. But nevertheless, I had a lot of witnesses to support the idea that these kids were making these claims against Michael Jackson up, that they had been hustling other people for money, including Chris Tucker, including there was a woman we had testify who was the editor of a local newspaper who claimed that Mrs. Arvizo went to her and told her they needed money for chemotherapy, and later on, the newspaper, I think, raised money for it. As I recall, it was something like $25,000, and then they found out that Teamsters Union Insurance money was paying for medical costs. So, I mean, the witnesses were endless to show that there was financial manipulation and a financial motive and a pattern of doing this with other people, including celebrities. So when you go through an experience like I did with Michael Jackson and you realize just how people concocted ugly claims of child molestation and child abuse, it sticks with you. You have to look very carefully at claims of child abuse, and sometimes we'll never really know what the truth is, or whether the truth was embellished more than it really was, or whether a child is so self-conscious about it, so sensitive about what happened that they don't even explain how bad it was. I mean, it's a very, very sensitive, difficult part of life, and particularly difficult part of trial practice. But I'll tell you, after what I saw in the Michael Jackson trial, and that went on for about 5 months, when I saw some similarities to what had happened in the Sandusky case, and again, I wasn't there. I never saw a single witness. I'm not an expert on the case like John Ziegler, but I'm disturbed by this financial motive. And, life is difficult, and putting money in your pocket's not easy. And, when you see a pot of gold out there, and you've got parents, salivating over getting money in their pocket or their child's pocket, you've got to look carefully about those facts and decide what you think is true and what you think is not. But Jim Clemente in that quote is just, he's off the wall.
well,
and
Tom,
John,
I feel. Go ahead.
Yeah, before you just say your few comments, say your comments, and then I want to give you your plug to your website. And thank you for joining us.
I just wanted to thank Tom for his courage and standing up for what he believes in general, and also specifically in the Sandusky case. And people can see his op-ed at our website, framingpaterno.com. And just one last point on the comparison there, Tom. There are a lot of similarities in that you had a lot of mothers in the Sandusky case. Situations where there is no father, you got a troubled kid, which, by the way, is part of why those kids end up interacting with a Sandusky or a Michael Jackson, because the charity element of this is an important part of this equation, and then it ends up leaving the celebrity being vulnerable because now you got a mother who's manipulating a kid, and in the Sandusky case, these were teenagers when the alleged abuse occurred, which I think is rather suspicious. But there's no question that once that someone is perceived as being, quote-unquote, a pedophile, that they are seen through a different prism, and it becomes much easier for investigators or potentially, in this case, in the case of Sandusky, mothers or even journalists, like happened in the Sandusky case. It's easy for them to manipulate people into believing either that they were molested or to take advantage of it because they don't think that they're putting an innocent person behind bars. Once they think, oh, this person's guilty, and in the case of Michael and in the case of Jerry, they're both a little bit odd. They both are very touchy-feely. They're both affectionate with kids. So they think, well, gee, it never happened to me, but it may have happened to somebody else, and if I'm not going to be the one to put an innocent person to jail, then I might as well get my money out of this. And I think that's what really happened in the Penn State case. And I just want to thank Tom for having very rare courage and intelligence to see through the media myth here. And I appreciate the time to speak to you guys. Thanks, and you guys have a great night.
Thanks, John. And visit John's website, John.